Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Kalinga Literature Festival. With me today, we have author Sonora Jha of this very timely book, How to Raise a Feminist Son. Sonora is an essayist, novelist, researcher, and professor of journalism at Seattle University. She's the author of the novel Foreign, and her op-eds and essays have appeared in the New York Times, Seattle Times, The Establishment, and several other anthologies. Welcome, Sonora. It is so wonderful to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. I am so honored to join the Kalinga Lit Fest. And Rituparna, I'm such an admirer of your writing too. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sonora. I feel like this book, it feels very personal. That is the magic, I think, of memoirs. I'm a memoirist as well, and we see this. We have people coming and telling us all the time, "This is my story," and it's so ironic that you tell your story, and that's how we connect, and that's the point of all art, I guess, human connection. So, thank you so much for writing about this very timely topic. We will just come to it, but I wanted to begin with the way your book opens. It's very interesting that how you started going to the movies with your son Gibran when he was just a baby. That's something unheard of. That too in India. I mean, I found it fascinating. And just before that, I'll just read a small paragraph just from the prologue. This is when Sonora was in the movies with her son. Go on, back in your cage, he commanded the ape. I shrank back in my seat, my neck turned stiff. Caesar grabbed the zookeeper's hand. Take your stinking paw off me, you damn dirty ape, the zookeeper hissed. Caesar pulled up to his largest size and bellowed. No! Caesar says no. Caesar speaks. Caesar has language. Caesar has rage. I gasped. Too loudly for a movie theater, the adult equivalent of a noisy baby at the movies. My son's hand squeezed mine. I tore my eyes from the screen to look over at him. His eyes were shining. He was smiling from ear to ear. He had been looking not at the screen, but at my face. This is why he had brought me here. This was why he was here. We resist. The ape resists. We learn to say no. Later, I would read books and academic essays on that film. I would be gratified that Caesar's no represented a mutiny against oppression. That scene would become something I pulled up regularly on YouTube and circulated to my friends and on social media as a cinematic battle cry for revolution. I doubt that it was as cathartic for most others. You had to have seen the movie, but you had to have seen the movie with us. I was so moved by this. I was moved by a lot, most of the book. So, like we said, your book opens with memories and how you didn't plan it, but you both just fell into this lifelong ritual of going to the movies together, starting when he was just an infant. I'm just so fascinated. And then you two went to the movies in every town, and that was kind of owning the town, I guess. That was your ritual. I mean, it's so mundane and so intimate and so yeah, so intimate at the same time. So tell us a bit about this ritual. How did you start it? Of course, when you first take a baby to the movies, you don't even know what you're doing. I guess it just happened. I mean, we do strange things when, especially in those years. I'm a mom too. So, and how did this ritual carry both of you through life? What did it mean? Tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reading those paragraphs in your voice. It was lovely to hear that. And, you were saying that it's such an unusual and strange thing to imagine taking a baby to the movies in India. But I think, in fact, that in India, I miss the fact that people would bring their babies to the movies. And, there's a baby crying in the background and people are still fine with it. And, it's such a big family affair, right? And I miss that in the US. I feel like we are too rigid here and we would totally frown on a baby, even though, of course, in India we do that as well. But we kind of expect that people will just bring their kids and there'll be some noise and everything. So, but as I write in the book, that my son was very quiet at the movies and I probably could feel the sense of wonder that I had at the movies. And so it became a sort of ritual for both of us. It became something that we would do together. And over the years, it sustained us because there were so many changes and so many interruptions and, so many unexpected things happening in our lives, driven by me, of course, right? Uh, but going to the movies was our constant. We would, as you said, we would go any city that we were in, even when we traveled, whether it was in Jaipur or it was here in different cities in the US, we would go watch a movie and it would feel like, okay, here we are together. And so even now, it's such a ritual. Of course, during the pandemic, my son and I talk about how that is the thing that we miss the most of everything else. It's such a visceral feeling. But I think too, why I put it there in the context of raising a feminist son is that whether it is Bollywood movies or Hollywood movies, the representation of women and not only how often they're represented, but in the ways in which they're represented is such an important artifact or such an important context to understand feminism, that why is the woman always sexualized at the movies? Why is the woman doesn't have such a big narrative arc in the movies? Why is the film focused on the hero's journey and what's going on with the women? So all of those conversations, because watching the movies is such a fun and entertaining thing, drawing feminist conversations out of the movies becomes then a fun and entertaining exercise, and also just such an educational one, because it's not like I wake up in the morning and say to my son, all right, today we will learn feminism. We're going to the movies and the conversations happen after, when we go to dinner after that, or go grab an ice cream or something. So that became like a big ritual, both to combine our lives together and to give us these moments of pleasure, but also to give us these moments of conversation.
Right. And also a little later, there's this. I'm shivering to even mention it. What you went through, the whole toxicity of Indian media. I've been a journalist in India. I was a business journalist, so I think we were more cocooned and we were unsafe in other ways. A lot of 5-star hotels and other stuff. So women are unsafe even in something like the media, and we're talking a few years ago where relatively outspoken women go there, relatively liberal women. I guess these are probably among the freest women in the bastion of patriarchy that is India. And we're talking about how unsafe they're here, and there is this part where you are forced to bathe. You are sent on a most unsafe assignment to Allahabad, not to Allahabad, but to cover the violence in that region. And you at Allahabad station, you have to bathe in that area where which is meant for all the Kumbh Mela sadhus, and it just covers you till the neck, right? And so all these men ogling outside are just, they know what you're doing in there. They can just see your neck and face. I mean, that is, and you're dying of heat. So it's not like you had a choice. And we can only, like, why would a woman put herself through this? It's not a choice. You're dying either way. It's how, tell us a little bit about that, because it's very important. You are this free liberal woman who is speaking English, which is a whole different level of privilege in a country like India, especially back then. These are battle wounds. There is PTSD for life. This is no less trauma than coming from a war zone in many ways. I mean, the way the body stores trauma, the psychology of it. So tell our viewers what happened, and tell us how you heal from all of it.
Yeah, that was just such a small part of, at the time, it just seemed, intense, but also it's only in hindsight that you realize what was going on, right? So and nothing really big happened to me. It was just the sense of going to going into the interiors of India as a woman, a young girl who grew up in Bombay, and I was about 22 or 23 at the time, and taking a shower at Allahabad station, taking water from the bucket and pouring it on myself because I was so hot, and we were thrown off the train because everyone expected that it would only male journalists would go, but I'm a woman journalist and I'm going, and here I am, trying to cool my body down, and all these people are staring at me.
And also, they thought you were a man. That's so interesting to me. Like, how? What kind of an editor sends that, and then they
Right.
think you're a man?
Yeah. So the ticket collector in the train thought that that something was happening, that I was kidnapped or something, because this was only male journalists would go on such an assignment. And so in that moment, I realized that, am I even supposed to be here? Am I taking up a man's job? Am I taking up space in a man's world? And also recognizing years later that, the reason I was so uncomfortable also, apart from the fact that people are staring at me, is that most public spaces in India are meant for men, are built for men, and we just sort of don't even notice these things. Some of my feminist friends, Samira Khan and Shilpa Ranade and Shilpa Phadke, have this amazing book called Why Loiter? And it's just about Mumbai and about how women are not allowed to loiter. And I did a research study on that as well, that women's bodies in public space we don't expect to see them, and we are moving from one point to another, but we're not allowed to loiter and kind of just be or take a bath, where now we are seeing all these men from in the Kumbh Mela causing this horrific spike in COVID and literally killing people because they feel they have the entitlement to public space, and just chock full, and nakedly taking this bath in the waters. And I was minimizing myself even at that one little shower on the railway platform, because that space and those showers are actually, those bathing areas are meant for men, right? They were not meant for me. So, I mean, these things are little moments that are terrifying for all of us, but we expect that, this is just, women should know this. This is just a woman's lot. And that's true of India, and it's true of the US as well, right? So when we think about women in the media and we find something as horrific as Harvey Weinstein, being a predator on all these, really established big Hollywood names, sexually assaulting all these women, and then recognizing, this is sort of a global phenomenon, and all of us need to be focusing on this. So, getting it back to talking about, like, what does this mean? What do those moments mean as a feminist raising a feminist son, and getting him to understand how his body moves in the world versus how women's bodies move in the world, and talking to our boys about these stories of our own and the trauma that our own bodies carry, so that they recognize what they're living with, and the experiences of women around them and girls around them.
So did that help you heal from this kind of trauma? Because now we understand what people may call psychosomatic. Something happened. I mean, I wrote a book on abuse. It took me years to figure out what it had done to me. Something as simple as mustard oil would be a massive trigger because it went back to when I was 5 years old, or something like this. How did you heal from it? I mean, you will have triggers years later at the most. I mean, there's so much shame in there. Do you think having just raising Gibran the way you did, and it's endless, right? The conversations, anything and everything becomes a feminist subject, and we have to have that label, because unfortunately everything else is toxic. I don't know, patriarchy, masculinity, whatever you want to call it. There's just no space for women. So was that part of your healing process? Is there any is there anything else you did to heal from it? Because every woman has so much shame she's subjected to pretty much from the time she's born. I mean, this is a very dramatic example, but even in the best cases. So tell us, how do you heal from the PTSD of something like that?
Yeah, and you're asking such an important question, and so many books need to be written about this in India, especially, right? We have such a culture of shame. We have such a culture of silence that even recognizing something as abuse, or recognizing something as trauma, or recognizing even like, oh, this space is not made for me, this place is not made for me. Even something like Goddess Sita said, that this world is not meant for women. There's no respect here for women, right? Uh,
Right.
so recognizing something like that and naming it as abuse, naming it as trauma, naming it as this is gendered abuse, right? It's like it's subjected on women and LGBTQ people, and this is maybe Brahminical violence. Like naming these things itself is so important, and we keep second guessing ourselves, and so that healing process is actually ongoing, because we second, even now, sometimes I ask myself, wait, am I doing this wrong? Am I saying something that, oh, am I hurting people? And I feel like, no, if I'm speaking out my truth, then the person that oppressed me and hurt me cannot claim that I am hurting them, because so we second guess ourselves and say, maybe I should be good and quiet and all of that. So yes, I would say definitely that there's some there's healing from by having a child, right? And I wouldn't say that motherhood is the only way to heal, or that our children are the only things. In fact, we shouldn't put that burden on them for healing us. But I would definitely say that because it was so important for me to break the cycle of abuse or violence, or misogyny in general, or toxicity in general, I was definitely working really hard at my own healing. And whether it is, we don't talk about going to therapy and things like that. Most of the time, we have to go to therapy because the people around us haven't been to therapy, right? And in our culture, that is always seen as, oh, she must be crazy, or she's too blah blah blah, and that's why she has to go to therapy. And no, excuse me, it's because I want to heal from all the things that were done, right? And so that was really important to me. And making boundaries with people, teaching my son to do that as well, teaching him, or even learning from him the way he honors his inner life and says, today I'd like some peace and quiet, I don't want to meet friends, right? Not always having, and as women, we're always called to be available, we're always called to be social, we're called to be there for our family and our community. And that is something I learned from him, to say, you know what, I can claim that for myself as well. So yes, there's that healing, that learning, and I feel like we owe that to our children, we owe that to ourselves, to claim those spaces of healing, to name the problem, to name these things, and to blow the whistle on some of these structures that keep enabling these boys and keep enabling these men.
Yeah, I wanted to, thank you for saying that, because when we come out and say our story, that in itself is such an act of courage and redemption, and getting your space back. And I feel it is no less than, I don't know, that in many ways it's like an act of war, but not offense, more like defense. But we hear of imposter syndrome, and it seems only women have it. More, I mean, tend to, or LGBTQ community, which is, they have also been oppressed and they have to speak their truth. And there's a whole bunch of, it's very similar, I think. So, do you think that has to do with boundaries, just the way women are raised from day one? And I don't think this is limited only to India. I've seen this in everywhere. I think, barring a few European countries, it seems everywhere there's just small things. Maybe you're not getting water for your family members, but you are a little more caring, like you said, always available, supposed to be more empathetic. All of these things, do you think they contribute to that imposter syndrome, which then, in some strange way, there's this overconfidence that men have, which amounts to bullying, and then women going more into their shell, and then poorer boundaries, and they go higher. So we are just caught in this very toxic, vicious cycle of prey and predator.
Yes, absolutely. And and I'm glad you're mentioning the effect on men as well, because one of the things that was so important to me is, because I love my son so much, I want to protect him from these ways, these cycles, right? And I want him to have the whole spectrum of human emotions, for instance, be able to cry, be able to be vulnerable, to be able to be a stay-at-home father if that's what, without someone saying, oh, what kind of man are you, or something like that, right? So it is it's driven from a place of joy, right? Like, I feel so much joy in my life. I don't even know how. I feel like if I could write a letter back to India and to Indian women, I would say, there's such a joyous life in breaking away from these
Yeah.
things and breaking away from these patterns and breaking away from being the good girl, because there's no end to that. I checked off all the boxes. I got married at 23. I had a son, all the good things that you're supposed to do as an Indian woman to be blessed. I checked off all of those, got educated, stayed a virgin until I was married, all these pressures that are put on us, and all the ways in which we are policed, and our sexuality is policed, and our voices are policed, and our smiles are policed, right? All of these things, I was doing all those things, and I could easily have continued to do those things, but it just didn't feel authentic to something that was rising up in me that felt like, no, I want more. I want more for myself. I want more for my child. So, again, to go back to this thing of like, there is no danger on the other side. We are told, oh, if you do this, if you do that, you will end up alone and, lonely and poor and ostracized. And hell no. And of course, I've had to work really hard to have maintained the respectability and all of that stuff. But I haven't lost friends. I mean, if I've lost friends, it's only because I've grown more authentic, and those people could not be part of that authentic journey. So, and I have all the respect of my son, and he knows how to get out of my way, and knows how to be close to me, and he doesn't feel any shame around me telling these stories. He doesn't feel it's any of his business. And that is so important, right? A lot of us feel like, oh, if I tell my story, it'll bring shame to my husband, or it'll bring shame to my son, and he shouldn't have to suffer this. We have so much empathy for boys and so much empathy for men. And Kate Mann has written a book about this, that we forget about women. And speaking of imposter syndrome, right? I have these friends, Ruchika Tulshan and Jodi Ann Bury, who recently put this incredible article about saying, stop telling women they have imposter syndrome. Work, kind of like what you're saying, work on the systems that tell them they don't belong, the systems that are built to make them feel on the outside or make them feel less accomplished, right? So I fight that all the time. And things like, even like, when I post about my book, a lot of us women are told, you should write about, oh, I'm so humbled and I'm so grateful. Oh, I cannot believe that I am getting these accolades. And I feel like, no, hell yeah, I can believe it because I worked hard for it, So it's like, why are we always saying this? I'm not humbled. I'm not humbled. I'm going to stop saying that, because no, I'm claiming my success. I'm going to claim that, yes, I worked hard and I put something out there and I deserve the praise. So let's start doing that. And there you go. Then there's no imposter syndrome. And who's stopping us? Just like stare in the face of the person who's stopping us.
I love that. That's so important that you mentioned that, because, yeah, only women are humbled, and you will see all the. I mean, not now, but a while ago, all the Miss Universes and everybody. I'm so humble and so sweet, but as a man, for whatever it is, will go and claim that pride as if it's his birthright, because that's how he's been taught to. So it's society. I don't think we can just blame anybody, and just the fact that there is a conversation about that, we have labeled it. This is imposter syndrome, this is gaslighting. uh, just giving them labels and names helps us realize, oh my god, this is what has been happening to me. And then it's like a diagnosis, right? You cannot become okay until you have found a disease. What your disease is, it's like a diagnosis. So that's how we shift. And I am so glad to hear of your journey, and thank you for speaking about it, because authenticity is everything. If you're not authentic, we really dying inside. So I don't think it's a choice. Like from inside, some part of us will always gnaw at us and scream that, I need to be me. It reminds me of this movie Ritik Ghatak, Meghidha Ka Tara.
Yeah.
we went to the same college. We had the same feminist teacher, Jerome Mulla, and I don't know if she showed it to you, but and I remember this so-called liberalized woman because she's earning, I'm forgetting her name, but she's earning for all of her family, and in the end, she has sacrificed herself so much. On it appears that she's this very liberalized woman because I don't know, it was a black and white movie, very old. She's earning and supporting everybody. She's taking, and at the same time, she's taking care of her brother, her father, everybody. But in the end, she develops some lung issue and she starts coughing blood and she's dying. And one of the most powerful scenes in that movie is she's in the mountains and she screams, Ami Bajpo, I want to live. And just the I want to live just echoes everywhere. And this is the story of every woman. I don't think a week goes by when I'm not haunted by that. That's the power of art. Because it's every single woman, no matter how liberal or how modern. I mean, you and me, we live between America and here we live in. You're in academic circles, writers. These are the people who are vocal about these things. I mean, we just want to live. That's the most basic human right. It's got nothing to do with gender. So I mean, even a plant has a right to live. So yeah.
Yeah.
We have a few questions here.
Yeah, let's do questions. I like that more than reading.
Yeah, since they're coming in before I move to the rest. So Aditya Bharat is asking, as a society, how can we create a balance in India? Do you think it is lacking in our education system?
Yes, I mean, I do think that there's a lot of gendered stories, right? Like I have a whole chapter on how our stories, right, from nursery rhymes or even, the stories of gods and goddesses, the mythological stories, and all of those have a very strange gender bias. And I write about how, when I was looking for stories on mothering, I was reminded of the stories of mothering. Most of the stories of mothering, like Yashoda and Sita and Parvati, were all about mothering boys. So that worked out really great for me because I had a boy and I was like, okay, I like these stories. But I also recognize that there aren't too many stories. I mean, I'm sure there are, but they're not as much in the mainstream about how to mother girls or the relationship between the mother and the daughter in terms of mythology, right? So even when we start with those stories and the way they find themselves in textbooks, and the way in which we, education itself for girls versus boys, we have to examine how, you know, how patriarchy sort of connects and intensifies some of these things for specific communities as well. And, where there's poverty, of course, people will think like, I should educate my son rather than the daughter. And so girls are taken out of school, girls are, start to menstruate and they're taken out of school. So all of these things, whether they are structural or even cultural, have to be examined because, as Rituparna said, it's about joy. So if you deny joy to half of humanity, if you're denying joy to girls, you're not even, your family or everything else is affected by that. So I definitely think the education system needs an overhaul, and our practices in education, the kind of books that we have, textbooks, and the way classroom structures and all of those things bear examination.
Thank you. I'd like to mention another question by Wyzine. Wyzine says, great conversation. Both of you are superb. What is missing in Indian parenting?
Oh my goodness.
I was just coming to that question as well. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's dangerous territory, right? But I would say what is missing so I was raised in a very modern home, right? I was raised in Bombay. My father was in the army, and there was a lot of support, and I would say that there was a lot of feminist support for the daughters, right? That we were told, we were given a full education, we were encouraged to be outdoors and things like that. But even so, it was very clear to me that my brother had more privileges, that there was something more golden about my brother than there was about me. Okay, so he was, of course, allowed to roam as far as he wanted and go. He would take me to places like, oh, come here, I've discovered this building that you can get to the terrace and have this incredible view. In Bombay when we were kids, and I remember that so vividly, thinking like, how come I don't go and do these things on my own? And so there was always this sense of me being a little bit less than. And then, of course, as we grew up, I wasn't allowed to have boyfriends. I had friends, male friends, and that itself was pretty, considered very modern at the time. But no boyfriends. It was general expectation. You don't get pregnant, or you don't, have sex before you get married. All these ways in which my parents were giving me cues, and of course there was violence in my home. So I'm growing up seeing gendered violence on my mother, and I'm seeing my brother is beating me and beating my sister. And I myself am growing up violent, like I would hit my sister as well, as a child. But my brother's violence continued into adulthood. And I would say, like, all of that, the enabling of his violence, the enabling of discipline, giving the brother this notion of disciplining, and the father as the disciplinarian, right? That kind of patriarchal structure, and also the the protecting. So even when we look at something like Raksha Bandhan, right? This kind of thing gets me in trouble. But I have to say,
Yeah.
tying a rakhi on our brother's wrist and asking for his protection. I think both genders should say, or all genders can tie, siblings can tie rakhi to each other and say, I love you and I honor you, instead of, oh, will you protect me? And then the brother will give a gift to the girl, because the protector is then also put in the role of a disciplinarian. If you're protecting me, you get to police me and tell me what I should be doing and what I shouldn't be doing. And then, if someone has anger management issues, that they can, sort of do the disciplinarian, take that into the disciplining, right, into that kind of policing and violence. So definitely, that all that is part of parenting. And in order to be more to achieve gender equity, we have to examine some of these messages that we are giving in our everyday, even maybe very loving things, right? Like Raksha Bandhan probably comes from a very loving place, but it becomes something completely different. So examining all those rituals, examining the way we are parenting, the messages we are giving in the way we are acting with our spouses, all that is really important in the Indian context.
So I had a question, and you've kind of answered that, with Waizin's question, which was the same thing. You grew up in a violent family, and how, although even if it is not that obvious, it seems all Indian women are born into violence. Yet we think it is love, and you mentioned this beautiful way of how Raksha Bandhan could be celebrated as an act of love. I love you, because whenever you have created something to protect, you have also created something to protect from. The protector is out of a job, if you will, unless you have that. I mean, as a kid, I was always told you don't have a brother and no one to protect you. That's why you are like this. And I grew up internalizing it until it took me a few decades to realize what bullshit is this. Like, I mean, come on. So do you think there's any redemption for women apart from what we've already spoken? And also, what is love? Do families even know what is love? It's so toxic. Is it better to just openly hate and say, I hate you? Because I don't know what love is. It's so conditional. I mean, you would listen to these things, then I will love you. Otherwise, like, it's so conditional. I always say human beings are incapable of unconditional love. But do we even know? Do we even know what is love? Our families just about this, about disciplining and hate and completely conditional love. Is there any such is there any redemption for families?
Oh my God, I love this question, and I love how you're naming certain things. So thank you for that, because it makes me look like a less bad person, bad woman. Um, but yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, and these things are heartbreaking, right? We're laughing about it now because we've come to a point of healing and understanding. But when you're going through it, it is crushing, and it's almost like so much of our head space and our heart space is taken up from clawing our way out of that kind of love, which is so conditional and which can be taken away at any point of time. And so 3 years ago, my mother called to tell me that she's not my mother anymore. And she had done this many times before because she'd enabled my brother to come and police me and be violent and throw my bags out, my suitcases, blah, blah, blah. And for what? Just, un like just totally forgettable things and things that I really didn't do. But there was a space made for his anger. He's an angry person. Why do you have to provoke him? Right. And then when I provoke him, right, whether it is through my writing or through something that I may say, then the violence upon me is justified. It's a bad thing, but it's in a way justified.
Well, there is nothing more, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is nothing that is a bigger threat to men especially, or to patriarchal women, than a woman simply existing and expressing herself in even an iota of her authenticity. Forget the entire spectrum. There isn't a greater threat. And I think Margaret Atwood mentions this, that women, what was it? Women being rejected by men, they fear that they'll be dead. It literally is that. Your truth is such a big threat that it could have you killed, or in your case, very close to that with so much violence.
Right.
I'm sorry you had to go through that, but thank you for telling your story.
Yeah, but the fact that women, men are afraid that women will laugh at them or reject them, and women are afraid that men will kill them.
There you go. Yeah.
And that is so important. And I write in the book, I write about how, say my mother, like, I have no doubt that she loves me. So speaking of love, right, what you're talking about,
Yeah.
I know that she loves me. I have no doubt that she loves me, but she doesn't know how to let me love myself on my own terms, right? So that's exactly what you're mentioning, that if we are living our full lives and just loving ourselves, somehow that seems to bother other women, because we don't know how to move out of that patriarchal structure, right? We don't know how to not expect women to be humble, to feel like, to be radiating love and kindness and compassion. Those things can be really toxic after a while, right? That there's a space for women's anger. And where is that space made for women's anger? In families and within love, right? We worship Kali and we call her mother and everything. And so then we enable the mother to be violent toward us. All the others are not, the notion of women's anger is seen as problematic, right? So all these things are like, when are we going to have that lens or the language or the love for women that is unconditional? And for me, it was important then to teach my son to do that. And it has reaped benefits. He's stood up to his grandmother when it comes to me. He has said things like, women are not treated well in India, and he said it with compassion. And even when I was crying the other day saying, I miss my mother and she's disowned me, and he said, that's actually a good thing because she didn't treat you well. And he has a good relationship with his grandmother, but for him to have noticed that, I don't speak of that, right? I'm speaking of pain. I'm speaking like I miss her. And he says, no, it's actually good for you, because he can see that I thrive more when I have separated myself from that kind of toxic love.
And the fact that he's able to distinguish between the two relationships, and that is I don't know I'm out of words, because he's able to maintain his relation with his grandmother and yet see how it's affecting you. That's really commendable parenting. I have a small son, and we have very similar situations, living between two countries, in the politics of America, all the stuff about being a person of color, all of that, sensitive son. So I really look up to that. Thank you. I've learned a lot from a lot of lessons from this book. And it's interesting how all the stuff that patriarchy, and especially all the Raksha Bandhan and Indian patriarchy, says that the son must be the protector, or the male must be the protector. It's ironic that he landed up protecting you, but through feminism in the healthy way. So in a way, he alchemized the toxicity of all of that, into a very tender and a very, very simple, gentle way of protecting. There's no need to go out there and be violent about it. So it's beautiful how it's come full circle.
Yeah, it's the allyship, right? Like he's not called upon to protect me, or we used to joke about this movie called Kasam Paida Karne Wale Ki.
I gotta see that. What a name.
It's totally fun to watch those kinds of things. But there's like, avenging the mother, or, all those things, right? Meri maan ko kuch kiya, and that kind of thing.
And Ma is out of the question then. Ma is just a trigger for these little boys to have an ego fest.
Right. The Ma is the Nirupa Roy, right? It's a kind of just
Ma, Behan, girl,
right.
whatever.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
there's no need to avenge. There's a need to be an ally. See what makes me happy and stand and be supportive of that. Right. But yeah.
I love that. There is no need to avenge. You just need to be an ally. So, what is feminism? Is that the definition of feminism?
Yes, I definitely think if we're talking about feminism for boys and men, right, and we're talking about cisgender, like boys and heterosexual men, especially because I think that's where toxic masculinity.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you want to tell our viewers what is cisgender? I don't think it's a term that is known to many in India.
Right. Yeah. So it's where genders on a spectrum. There are many different genders, right? But the one where we say this is male and man, right? That is a cisgender, where it's usually we say at birth, or even before that we say, oh, ladka hone wala, it's a boy, those kind of things. But they could end up being a very different gender as they grow. But so we're talking about the cisgendered man who is identifies as man, right, or boy, and is growing up within that notion of masculinity, and that we give to them. So that is where I feel like toxic masculinity sort of has its grip, because we are telling boys to be a certain way, that this is what boys do, this is not what boys do, etc. Right? So in that notion, telling them to be or raising a feminist son or raising a feminist boy means letting him explore, just like other genders, and especially women or girls, explore all the emotions, all the states of being human, and recognize that all humans deserve respect, space, public space, physical space, have access to anger, to opinion, to public office, to promotions, to leadership, right? Being presidents in the United States, or prime ministers in India, we have had a woman. It would be nice to have another one now.
Yeah.
But so recognizing all of those things and seeing their role within that, and standing as allies, right, in whatever way they can, whether it is within the family, whether it is with your spouse, with your children, or whether it is making legislation, or voting, or working for someone's campaign, or or changing institutions, standing up for women at the workplace, and hiring more women, and looking at all the structural barriers that exist for women's promotions, etc. Right? So all those ways are all those things are you being a partner feminist and an ally feminist.
Yeah. So I love those terms: partner feminist, ally feminist. I wanted to just come to this other part. You said, feminism gave Gibran the vulnerability to cry. It is so critical that men cry. It is so critical that women can safely express rage completely, uncensored. And similarly, men express grief and cry, because it's all steps, right, to trauma. So, but it is not easy being a feminist boy in a patriarchal world. Especially, it's already not easy being a sensitive person. And if you are a feminist boy, in many ways it's harder than being a feminist woman. I always feel patriarchy in that way is tougher on men in some strange ways. So how, I mean, we can see the gifts it has given to him, but how does it help him in this world amidst amidst his peers who may not be feminists? How does he navigate day to day? I mean, internally he may be okay, but and it's a huge gift because he's sensitive. He can avoid situations like he taught you boundaries. Boundaries are life. But amidst his peers in this world, which is still largely toxic masculine, and I don't know, I find just the workspace is so masculine. It's hard to be a woman there. So in the middle of all of this, how does a sensitive feminist boy thrive. And next part would be something like that in a place like India, which is patriarchy on steroids. So,
Yeah. I think things are getting better for them. I think things are getting better for our boys, that they are able to thrive. So, for instance, my son has drawn into his life the kind of friends who think like him and are feminists, and don't even have to claim it, right? So he doesn't like being he doesn't like the label in the way that it is imposed or used in a performative way. Yes, dude, I'm a feminist, right? And he even talks about how a lot of young men these days just like that because it's supposed to be cool to be a feminist, right? So he doesn't enjoy it in that way, and he feels like,
you also get girls.
yeah. So exactly, and I write about that in the book too, that the kind of predatory feminist, right? So I think for him, the joy of being a feminist is that he is able to draw the kind of friends that have that gentleness about them. So how does it work? How does it empower them, and how is it good for them? Well, so when he was going through a heartbreak or a tough moment in his life, he was able to call his friends, because he didn't want to talk to his mother about that. He not necessarily, he told me about it, but I may not be the best person to talk to him about that, or the best person to stay calm in that situation with him, right? So he called his friends, and he called his male friends, he called his men friends, and they were able to be tender and say, oh yeah, I know you're hurting, and he was able to cry with them.
I love
So
that. That's
yeah,
what
and
boys would do. I mean, which is so sad.
exactly,
And men would be like, "Hey, you're okay. Let's go for a drink, or let's go
exactly,
bowling, or whatever if they play a sport." It's some of
right.
those typical things,
Yeah, like man up, dude, man up, or she was just a bee, like
Yeah,
bitch or whatever, right?
yeah, yeah. Good
No,
reading. Yeah.
right. But they're not responding from a place of misogyny. They're responding like, oh, my friend is hurt and I want to be there for him, right? And that they're able to talk about their feelings, and they're talking about their heartbreaks, they're talking about therapy, they're talking about mental illness, all these things. This is only healthy. Like, this is healthy for him. That gives him a space where he can actually be a healthy person and doesn't have to resort to alcohol or drugs and things like that. So
Or
how is it,
violence.
or violence, right?
Yeah.
And or anger that is consuming. So I think that can only be healthier for him. So this is just one instance, and so he's drawn these kind of people into his life. He has this way of, like, he is has worked for a woman candidate for elections, and done campaigning without tooting that horn of like, I'm so great or anything. So I think it's only liberating for our boys and for our men, and it's just such a gentle space. And he's able to draw, like, one of his closest friends is his friend from high school and middle school, a young woman who is just such a loving person, and he gets to have her in his life, and she teaches him to be a better feminist. So I think all of that, it just makes them, it gives them richer lives, like, overall just gives them richer lives.
Okay, so so many men take pride in their toxic masculinity. Our movies have always hailed them that way because there is something very beautiful about masculinity. In New Age circles, we call it the divine masculine and the divine feminine, which were the traditional traits. But somewhere we got lost in all of these, on all the misogyny and stuff, all this protecting and all of that. But so many men take pride in the toxic masculinity. It is their identity. And of course, it is a construct of society, of movies, of culture. It is who they are, and identity is everything. So, is there any hope for toxic men? Can a grown toxic man turn feminist? And I have I have a couple of close male friends who are. I've always seen them as tender and sweet, but that's because I've done so much Jungian psychology. And, and after a point, you are able to see the point of view of even a serial killer. So, and then you become that woman, and you want to be like, no, no, enough of compassion, and there's a bit of my boundary. So that's a constant battle. But is there any hope for such men? Because I see them, their rage is misplaced. Some of them, ex-army people who have so much PTSD from wars, but men don't cry. So suddenly we will kill our wives, or something like that. perfectly, like you're from an army background, the army person is held as this ultimate man, and or like Shiva is held as this epitome of masculinity, which is stoicism, which is detachment. I know all the Hindus, but people are going to come behind me for this, but it's true. It's we value these things: stoicism, detachment, completely cool no matter what, which means there's a volcano hiding in there and it will burst in the weirdest of uh, situations, versus, let's say, Krishna as an archetype, who is more queer, if you will, who laughs, who does strange things. Like there's more a bigger show of emotions. Slightly diverging from my original question, is there any hope for toxic men, grown toxic men, say 50 years old?
Yeah, I definitely think there's hope. So one of the things I talk about is recently is my father apologizing to me for the
Mm.
violence, right? And recognizing and naming that yes, of course, I was a violent man, and I'm really sorry, and naming that he's lonely because of that, because of the violence, right? And he said, I've lost my family, I've lost my children, don't talk to me as often, and to be vulnerable and to say that and say, yes, I call this upon myself, I should not have been that way with your mother, I should not have been that way with you kids. Now I can still have boundaries with my father, and it's not like he's still a work in progress and everything, and that it's not completely redeeming him or anything, but recognizing that this is actually a quantum leap. I posted about it on Facebook, and
Yeah, I think I saw that.
yeah, and a lot of people wrote to say that they could not even imagine their fathers apologizing to them for the wrongs done. And then I realized how many people have had this from their fathers who grew up in these toxic male cultures, right? So they were screwed over in a way, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah.
were cheated out of having a kind and compassionate life. And so when my father recognizes this, right, and my son sees that sadness in him, he's he's probably likely to say, like, oh my god, I'm not going to be like that, I don't want to end up lonely, or I don't want to end up with so much regret in my life, so I won't be, many reasons not to be violent, but he sees that as well. So I do think if my father in his late 70s can feel that way, then come on, men in their 50s, men in their 40s, and can walk away from toxicity. I think what happens is when they recognize it, then they see, like, there's a way out, and that they can still be considered masculine. I love my son says I have a certain type of man that I'm attracted to, and I love some of the markers of masculinity, and I love being asked out, and I'm single and I'm divorced, and so but it's not because I hate men, it's because I love men. And
It's such a misconception that feminists hate men. We only hate toxic masculinity.
exactly.
We must hate all toxic things.
Right, right. And I love men, and that's why I have hope. I have hope for good men, and I'm a total romantic. I'm a total Bollywood person, so I would like the Shah Rukh Khan and the Hrithik Roshan and the Amol Palekar and whatever, all these images that we have, like, all meshed into one, where someone is actually, and I still enjoy the ritual of, like, the of dating and things like that, but so I think there's a way to be masculine and really woo a woman or whatever. All those things are possible within a feminist masculinity.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you mentioned that, because I feel with all the misogyny and the toxic masculinity, that has been a loss to men, to women, to all of us. And I hope we find, with books like yours, with conversations, with all the. I didn't get into Me Too and Harvey Weinstein because you already touched upon that. With all of that, I hope we reach a world where there can be some balance, and because there's something very beautiful about a masculine man who's in its full alignment, which is why we have these god archetypes of Shiva and whatever, and the woman doesn't have to split into Bhadra Kali, which I'm Bengali, so we have Bhadra Kali, the acceptable one, and Kali, who is the wild one. I mean, the woman shouldn't have to split. She should be just one person who can just be herself, and everyone can be safe, and we can just be human and enjoy our time on the planet like we were meant to. Before we end, I would like you to there's this chapter, what would the goddesses do? Could you read that for us?
Yeah, sure. I'll read a little passage from that. Um, So I'll read a section about Yashoda. Um, so Yashoda, let me see. One of the greatest love stories in Hindu mythology is the one between Yashoda and her adopted son Krishna. The baby's birth mother, Devaki, was in prison, thrown there by her brother, King Kamsa. Krishna was born in prison, smuggled out, and given to Yashoda to raise. The babies born to his mother before him had been bludgeoned to death, dashed on the prison floor. I challenge my generation of Indians to erase from their consciousness the comic book visual of baby head dashing on the floor, because King Krishna had been told that he would be vanquished by one of these babies born to his sister. Violent uncle for Krishna, violent uncle role model for Gibran. But we will get to that later. Yashoda, a woman from a lower caste, had no idea of the divine powers that the baby Krishna was born with. She was she was handed the smuggled baby to raise and got busy with the job of providing copious amounts of love. She nurtured the baby, sang love songs about this son, forgave him his butter thieving ways, and as he grew into a young man, enabled his outrageous flirtations with every young maiden in the village. Some of the stories make these flirtations sound more like harassment, so I made a note to do better than Yashoda there. For all her enabling and privileging, Yashoda raised a feminist ally. How do we know Krishna was a feminist? When Queen Draupadi from the Hindu epic the Mahabharata was being sexually assaulted by her brothers in law after her five husbands wagered her in a chess match and lost, she damned all those men in her life and called out to Krishna. The child Krishna had grown into an adult divine power by then, and he was sort of a part divine, part human advisor to this gambling, raping family. He showed up as an apparition and draped Draupadi in a never ending sari. The rapist royals tugged and tugged at the miles of sari until they fell down, exhausted, unable to strip Draupadi naked. At another point of time in the history of the universe, and in another comic tossed to me when my brother was done, a princess named Rukmini was kidnapped and was being forced into marriage with a king at the wishes of her brother and father to advance their kingdom. Rukmini, who had never met Krishna but had long had a crush on him from the legends she had heard, sent for him through a talking bird. Krishna arrived. He proposed to him. He accepted. They eloped. May we all find men who, if we so choose, drape us in endless silk or elope with us when we're in a bit of a spot.
I love that. Thank you so much, Sonora, for being with us and for this very, very important book, How to Raise a Feminist Son. I strongly recommend everybody get it. You don't have to have a son like me to have it. I think it'll help us understand a lot of things, and do gift it to all of the toxic men in your life. I don't think there's a single woman walking on the face of this earth who doesn't know at least a handful of them, if not more. And just like Sonora shared how her father came around, there is hope for us. There is hope for toxic masculinity. There's hope for everybody. And yeah, we need more of these stories. So thank you again for coming to Kalinga Literary Festival. Thank you, Kalinga, for hosting this talk. Have a wonderful day.
I just want to show also the Indian cover, Indian book, so that people in India will be getting this one. And it's also such a gorgeous cover. I absolutely love the color combinations and everything. But thank you so much, Rituparna. This was such a lovely conversation. And thank you, Kalinga, as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.